This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with my co-host, Phil Goldberg. Our podcast, Spirit Matters, found at spiritmatterstalk.com and on iTunes and everywhere else you can find podcasts. We are also now a YouTube channel. So not only can you listen to us, but you can see us and our guests. And you can find that by going to YouTube and just typing in Spirit Matters Talk. And in both cases, we would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe. It's free. We have about 300 shows in our archives. And we also appreciate those people that have contributed to help keep us on the air. And if anybody wants to contribute and help us continue, just go to spiritmatterstalk.com and the information is there. Our guest today, Mr. Neal Allen, he has led a very interesting, remarkable life in many ways that I think I can, and I think a lot of our viewers can relate to. They probably had similar experiences, especially if they've gone on any spiritual path. And he is an author, and his latest book, Shapes of Truth, now available, and we'll be discussing that a bit today. So thank you so very much, Neal, for coming on. Neal in Marin County right now. I'm in Iowa, and Phil is in Los Angeles. So we're spread out, but Zoom brings us together.
Hi, Dennis. Hi, Phil. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. So, Neal, Dennis alluded to your having an interesting life. That's a good segue. We always like our guests to tell our listeners something about their spiritual journey. So tell us in the short form of your how you came to the spiritual path you're on, or paths that you've tread, and what led you to this new book.
Hi, yeah. Unlike a lot of people, I didn't have much of a spiritual interest or yearning for most of my life. And so I happened to grow up in an intellectually oriented family and a knowledge-based universe. And I was perfectly content and happy within that. And I liked being rational. I studied rational things. I became a newspaperman, which is finding truth in the social world and trying to find rationality in the social world. And I grew a family and wanted to make a little more money, went into the corporate world, was perfectly happy in the corporate world, and enjoyed watching Darwin at work, and things made sense. The world made sense to me. And I got tricked into spiritual interests by a therapist. I was coming out of a failed marriage, and I thought I was sitting with an everyday post-Freudian therapist who had studied directly with Fritz Perls and with Carl Rogers and had some chops. And all of a sudden, it emerged that he had also spent a lot of time with the Rajneesh, the guy who became Osho, and also with in a mystery school called Diamond Heart with a guy named A.H. Almaas. And he started to take me places fundamentally to remove identities that were quite unexpected for me. Instead of trying to fix me, he was far more interested in finding me and helping me find myself in my original self. And in the midst of it, Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth, came out. And I think of that as having been as if I went through the Four Noble Truths. That was the first noble truth, was all life is suffering. And that's what that book told me. And until I read A New Earth, I hadn't really recognized that I was suffering. I'd been kind of oblivious to it. I'd been a fairly happy person as far as I knew. And I thought that I suffered emotional suffering like anybody else. And it was kind of a thing you did, and you fixed it through therapy or through friends or whatever. And I was amazed to discover, no, I was torturing myself all day long and not even aware of it. And then I think Bob was my therapist, Bob Birnbaum, was the second noble truth, was kind of explaining to me about, letting me know about identities and how sufferings were tied to attachments. And then I just happened, a friend took me to a sitting, and I'd never been to a sitting. Well, maybe once. I think I had sat with Allen Ginsberg and Elmed for a while when I was a teenager. But other than that, I had never meditated or anything. And I'm sitting in a room, and in the front of the room was the modern master Adyashanti. And Adya, just as all these guys do, took us into a meditation before he started his talk. And so I'm sitting in the meditation and I close my eyes. I don't know, a lot of your listeners probably can't remember this, but the first time you sit in a room full of strangers and close your eyes in silence is very weird and uncomfortable. And to add to the discomfort, I had the sensation that Adyashanti had pulled my soul, which I thought was kind of dragon breath, gray matter, smoky matter, into himself and returned it to me after kind of scanning it, as if he was going person by person while we had our eyes closed and scanning our souls. And I'm sure Adyashanti doesn't do that. I have no idea whether he's capable of doing that, but I had the experience that that happened. And I had the experience that even though it was, I would have categorized it as a superstitious or ridiculous experience, I had the experience that something miraculous had happened, something supernatural had happened, and that the only important thing about it was that it had happened, not that it had a particular meaning to me, that the gray matter meant I had a dirty soul or something like that. It was that it was an entry into a realm that was real that I had never explored. And so that's the third noble truth. There is a way, right? And there was an opening into another world. Mm-hmm. And then I entered into, soon after that, I entered into H.I. Almaas's mystery school myself, and spent, all told, probably 6 or 7 years, off and on for about 10 years, studying his various entryways into spirituality. And those took me into reading through a lot of Eastern classics and rereading Eastern classics and finding that the East, kind of points the way a little bit stronger than a little bit more elaborately than, say, Plato does or any of the Western metaphysicists.
Neal, if I could ask you, during this period of time, were you in the corporate world? Were you working? Did you take time off? How did you? How was your immediate life affected by this? And I also wanted to get into your relationship with Bob Birnbaum, because I think when he passed, it was quite traumatic for you and led you to more exploration, especially exploration of how one relates to death. But first, what were you doing during that period of time?
Yeah, this was 2006, and I was in the corporate world until 2011. I would say over the course of those 5 years, my capacity for working in the corporate world declined. I don't know whether that was other circumstances, because I was also kind of finding myself as a single person in the world more generally than just finding my spiritual self. And so everything was a rediscovery to me. And I might have kind of used up my corporate capacities. I'll never know whether it was tied to doing the spiritual work or not, but it did decline. I lost my job basically through inattention, and found myself really devoted to my spiritual work. So there was a bit of a descent in there, an ordinary descent, as I was committed myself more and more to the ascent. And I moved into doing this and that, executive coaching, those sorts of things. A little bit of I always keep my hand in writing. That's kind of my default mastery. And so whether I was working in the corporate world or journalism, I found that I could express myself through writing better than other ways. So I think I saw more possibilities for myself than making a lot of money.
Neal, let's get to your book. What gave rise to the book that we're here to talk about, Shapes of Truth? Tell us what led to it, and give us the thumbnail so we can dive into it a bit.
Yeah, the thumbnails that are hidden inside your body are 35 body forms, I call them. They're sensations. Each has a separate color, and they can appear as beautiful little objects like jewels, or geometric shapes like spheres. And they're primarily identified by a sudden color appearing in your torso. And they seem to have a universal vocabulary, so that the red sphere in you is the same as the red sphere in me in terms of meaning. Each one associates with a particular emotional support that you may feel that you're missing or need. So a red sphere in the chest is strength. I may feel that I'm deficient in some capacity. I can get a flush of a red sphere in my chest, and I'm reminded that I'm born with all the capacity that I need. Or a platinum bar may appear in my spine, and I'm reminded that I share in a universal will, a universal steadfastness. I can stand on my own because of my generalized support from all around me. They were discovered outside, the 5 of them the Sufi knew about. This guy, A.H. Almaas, his real name's Hamid Ali. He writes as A.H. Almaas, writes prolifically about spiritual experiences. He discovered 30 more of these, and discovered that you can use them by exploring them one by one to uncover your issues and to help you resolve your emotional issues. So it's as if my emotional issues are a house with 35 rooms, and I can go into a room and it's cluttered, and I can work through the clutter of that room, and knowing kind of that I have this inner support capacity that feels tangible to me can help me with removing the clutter. And I can move from room to room to room to room. So one room will be my mom issues, one room will be my God issues, one room will be my feeling of not having steadfastness, one room may be my feeling of being unable to accept disappointment, and you can kind of move mechanically through the rooms. So it's a way to use psychodynamic work to clear away obstacles of the ego. When I was studying in the Ridwan school, in his mystery school, the Diamond Heart School, because I came out of a Western philosophy background and had been interested in Plato a lot as a kid, I noticed these kind of resembled the Platonic ideals or the Platonic forms, and I had left after I left the mystery school, I emailed him and I said, look, you've written all these books, but I don't think people know that you have contributed to Western philosophy in this way of finding a concrete set of examples of the Platonic ideals, and that there might be a usefulness in the history of philosophy for this to be exposed. You should write a book about this. And he wrote back and said, it's a good idea. I have other books I want to write, but it sounds like you might be interested in this. If you want to write the book, I'll help you with it. And so I wrote the book as much as anything as a debt to an important teacher to myself. And the first version of the book was a lot more intellectual and a lot more erudite, and
Less commercial.
Less commercial. Two different publishers who bought it had second thoughts. Both of them had second thoughts about its commercial appeal, and while I bought it back each time, I did cave, and I rewrote it, and I actually made it a readable book, I think. And
but Neal, let me ask you, what was your what did you want to accomplish with the book? What did you want to communicate, most importantly, to your audience, if anything at all? Yeah, any specific thing at all?
Yeah, in the end, by the time that I finished the final version of the book, I had worked with so many clients one-on-one that I realized that it wasn't important where this fit in with Western philosophy. It was important that this is a tool for respite from suffering. And I wanted people to be able to have access to this extraordinarily efficient way to move through the obstacles of the ego one by one by one by one. And that for me, at least, I don't know for everybody by any means, but for me, that's all the work. I'm not interested particularly in exploring different versions of bliss, but a version of equanimity or bliss or whatever you want to call it will appear if I provide it with the opening by getting my defenses out of the way. And this is a particularly strong way of getting the defenses out of the way. There are other ways to get the defenses out of the way. What A.H. Almaas has come up with is a very efficient, kind of mechanical, step-by-step way to move through the obstacles of the ego. And I thought that was important for the world to see, at least to know.
From what I gather, I'm sorry, Neal.
Yeah, go ahead.
From what I gather, reading the material online, the process, or one of the processes, has the person essentially feel what's going on in the body and perceiving what you call body forms that have shape and color and meaning. Are these body forms, you say there are 35, are those sort of archetypal and one or more will show up at different times for different people, or are they body forms that exist within the body at all times?
So both. Okay, so they exist there. So everybody has access to all 35. Whether you will find a need to access any particular one will depend on your archetype. I mean, if you're using archetype as a kind of Jungian term, where I can measure myself as being highly concerned about these issues and less concerned about these issues, and I can define a personality by which issues are strongest that I'm most concerned about through an Enneagram or through a Myers-Briggs or something like that, then yeah, you could type yourself through these, but they are somehow inborn. You know, I think about Chomsky a lot when I'm answering a question like this, because Chomsky came up with a universal grammar that we're all born with, that is simply syntax. We share the same syntax, and he knows that it's inborn, universal, and peculiar because it doesn't share all its attributes with Western logic. And so you would think that syntax and logic would match one-to-one, and they don't. And so from there, he can move to a proof that there's a universal grammar. What Chomsky always says at the end of his books about grammar, about the universal grammar, is that all he's proved is that there's a universal syntax. He has proved nothing about semantics. He can't find meaning in a syntax. Well, if I'm born with a universal vocabulary, a rudimentary vocabulary of 35 words of value, words that are all on the right side of right and wrong, the good side of good and bad, then maybe I have the beginning of a semantics being inborn. And maybe all of our arguments over ethics being man-made and human restraints on our God-given ability to be anything good, bad, right, wrong. Maybe this is an adjustment to that we're actually born rigged to the good, rigged to what's right. And that if we remove our defenses, the social restraints that tell us that we're bad inside and we need to control it in order to live communally, then a lot of things get turned upside down. But it does allow me to feel a resemblance to the external God internally. So if I'm rigged to the good, if I find at that kind of Ramana Maharshi core self that can't add another word to I am, that there are these subtle little attitudinal words that I can add to it, like I am strong, I am peaceful, I am accepting, I am, right? I can adjust that I am in a way that feels natural to me, that extends out into the world so that I can use my human reason within a context of absolutes. I can participate in the world with free will, even though I am an absolute being.
Right. Let me ask you this, Neal, on a practical basis, and in the time we have, what is your spirit? Is there a particular spiritual practice that you are involved in or practices on a daily basis? Because a lot of what you're saying involves a lot of intellectual analysis, it seems, and or a lot of thinking. Are there spiritual practices that you participate in where you let go of that and find that important in your understandings?
Well, I never have to let go of that. That I have to be aware of the fact that I use my intellect to describe what's essentially phenomenology, right? So the core feeling of equanimity is identical to the core feeling of having a full belly.
Mm-hmm.
And the feeling of dynamism and the discussion in my head of the dynamic of participation in the world has a core feeling of a kind of trippy, indeterminate movement of energy within and without my body, right? And so I'm as I talk, my body is moving me and guiding me through participation in the world by informing me when I am being accurate and close to the truth, and when I'm not, by how amplified the phenomenology of the energy moving through my body is. So it's kind of like I participate in the world much more, even though I talk about it a lot, I participate in the world as much more a sensory being than anything else. So that I have, even though I've never done a Kundalini practice, that's my, if I had a path now that where I wanted to support what happens as I move through the world, I'd probably choose a Kundalini path. To answer your question directly, I don't have a path.
Neal, when I was reading the process that you outline online of feeling for these body forms, it reminded me of a process developed by Eugene Gendlin back in the 60s, I think, called focusing, where you feel what's going on, the felt sense.
Yeah.
They used to. Are you familiar with that? Is it similar to that? That's
It's
first question.
Yeah. I've been asked that before, and so I looked into it, and it's not actually.
Oh, it's not. Okay.
This is much more mechanically, symbolically designed.
And the other question is, it sounds like a very therapeutic process, this use of body forms. Where does it become a spiritual practice?
Yeah, I don't see
Where's the
distinctions.
transition?
Yeah. No, I understand. I think that every time you encounter yourself without a defensive reaction, if you're attentive to it, a little bit of light opens. So for me, a curtain starts to part. And for a while, it was a literal curtain. I mean, I literally had a sense of wrinkled curtains parting and this other kind of weird light coming in and light coming in. And I think that the removal of a defensive posture will always, when successful, open up a broader, more curious view of the world that allows in much more information and much more fascination. To me, in the end, you know, we're in a culture where everybody talks about a value, getting your values right in your life, having a purpose-driven life, and all of that sort of thing. And those all feel awkwardly moralistic to me. And if I have a purpose, it's to be fascinated by the world. And that fascination is with my mind and with my body and with my heart, moving in through the world. If I get out of my separateness and my defensiveness, I'm going to be fascinated by the world, and it is going to flow through me as a fascination. And I think that all spiritual paths, when they don't get kind of locked up in a belief system or a moralistic system, will take me to that exact kind of place. It'll be different for everybody, but that sort of place.
I have one last question for you, and that is, you write in your bio about your work and getting over your fear of death. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so you had mentioned that before. Yeah, when Bob Birnbaum died, I noticed, 6 months or a year later, I was still feeling anguish. And there was just something wrong with the picture. You know, I understand that everybody has a different way through grief, and we allow for anguish to go on forever if it needs to go on forever. That's not what I'm talking about. I just had a feeling there was something wrong with the picture as I found myself crying again over his death. He had died in his 80s. He had died happily. He had died well, all of those sorts of things. What was I doing missing him and missing him and missing him? And all he had been was a guy who had been in my life once a week for an hour, you know, for a few years. And that bothered me. And I happened to, it's one of those synchronistic things where right then I was in a book club, and the book club read a couple of essays by Montaigne, and Montaigne wrote this essay about death, in which he said, to get over the fear of death, spend your time with it. Spend all the time. You read about it. In his day, go to a battlefield, look at the corpses, watch. If you're lucky enough that somebody's dying around you, spend some time with them. And I took him seriously, and I thought, yeah, that made sense to me. And so I joined hospice. And meanwhile, right around the same time, both my dad and my dog started to die, like object lessons for me. And I just devoted the next year or two to mostly reading about, spending time that I could around dying people, and it works. If you do that, death becomes so visible and so real and so delightful. You know, you talk to people who work in hospice as volunteers or as nurses or social workers. They will tell you that almost to a person that this is selfish work on their part, that there's it never feels selfless because it's just so fun and so powerful to be around dying people, to watch people letting go and to watch the capacity for letting go and acceptance and surrender. And yeah, sure, there's terror and there are people who die poorly, as far as we can tell when we watch them dying and that sort of thing. But most of the time, most people are going through really rapid lessons and changes, and it's awe-inspiring, and it's ordinary at the same time, and it feels very comfortable to watch it and to be with it, and it works osmotically. I feel more comfortable about death.
Great,
That's
great.
your own death, you mean?
Yeah, my own death. Yeah, yeah.
Have you
I,
experienced? Go ahead.
you know, people talk about spend the next year, you know, the Stephen Levine thing, spend the next year as if you're you only have a year to live, right? And what would it feel like if you died in 10 minutes or if you died in a year or whatever? I look at it, what would it feel like if I died 10 minutes ago? And it just clears everything away. Oh, I get to start over. I get to start from scratch, and I have all this practical memory to use, so that life is easier as you get older.
But,
I'm
but
an
that
old
but
guy.
that assumes a certain belief system, like you do continue it all. Do you think that's also important in facing death? That it seems that people that have a belief in an afterlife or a continuation of life, it's a lot easier to deal with than somebody that thinks, okay, the lights are out now, it's over.
You know, what do I know? I only know where I live right now. I mean, I'm strangely uninterested in what happens after I die. I've always been strangely uninterested. I think I benefit from having been an atheist
Absolutely.
for 50 years, right? And before I discovered a wider world, and I just don't care. I mean, how can I care about it? That's not my job. My job's to care about right now, you know, if I have a job.
And I'm curious, you know, we're all at the age and fast approaching the time where we might have to confront our own deaths, and we're losing people. I've lost people close to me by, you know, increasing numbers in recent years. And when people ask me if I'm afraid of death, I always say no, because I'm not. I just don't want to suffer a whole lot. Or as Woody Allen said, he's not afraid of death. He just doesn't want to be there when it happens. And but I'm having more trouble dealing with the loss of others that I care about than, you know, the possibility of my own death. Although I don't know how I'll react when I'm on my deathbed. Has it changed? Has your experience working in hospice and consciously looking at death, has it changed? Have you lost people close to you since then, and is it different because of what you went through?
Very different. And one thing that I've noticed is that the culture emphasizes anguish as the meaning of grief, and we tend to conflate anguish and grief. I've noticed that most of my tears from the loss of people around me or animals around me, most of my tears are gratitude. And it's an interesting thing that in the set of 35 shapes that I write about, these universal divine characteristics of support that we carry with us, only one looks at the past. right? 34 of them are present and deal with things that are happening in the present and occur in the present about things. Only one really adjusts to the past, and that's gratitude, right? So gratitude is a divine presence inside me. And the more I looked at that, the more I started to wonder whether grief is intended to resolve into gratitude, that there will be that anguish and objective sorrow are the beginning of the period of loss after someone dear to me dies. But eventually that will resolve into gratitude. And I wonder, why would that be, right? I could think of intellectual reasons why it would be that, you know, everything here is an influence on me, and it's wonderful to take the negative and the positive influences and remove the words negative and positive from them and see that the negative ones probably taught me more and brought me more, and the so-called positive ones were probably boring. And all of that, I can look at it fairly, you know, I can look at it through Eastern texts, that kind of way. Or I can look at it that most of what that person brought to me that created this bond that I have with them is long gone anyway. I got most of what influenced me out of that person the first year I met them, if it knew them or whatever. And then I was kind of repeating those lessons, right? Why am I hanging on to old lessons by hanging on as if that person is needed for me now? And it becomes a broader question of why am I missing someone when their influence has already done all its noble and glorious things to influence me, that to make me who I am now? I don't know. That's a hard question to answer. It's a question that I find helpful to ask myself.
Right. So very, very honestly put. Neal, thank you so much. Phil, any other questions?
No, let's remind our viewers and listeners about the title of Neal's book, The Shapes of Truth. Available. Oh, you're going to hold it up?
Hold up a copy. We'll have all this
I was.
posted on our site.
Show and tell.
I've got
all
one.
right. There you go. Shapes of Truth by Neal Allen, Neal, N-E-A-L. Well, we'll have all that up on the site.
And you can always
YouTube.
contact us directly, but we'll have all that posted up.
Okay.
Neal, thank you so much for your time. Very fascinating material.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Very enjoyable to be able to talk about this stuff.
Yes, I'm sure it is. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you again. Take care.
Phil, that was Neal Allen, author, seeker, very interesting story, very honest. And he's started in therapy and then had a therapist who had a kind of a spiritual background and has been with Osho and studied under someone who studied with him. And interesting. And his book, The Shape of Truth, fascinating, an interesting approach.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about the diamond approach and
Right.
Almaas. And apparently, obviously, Neal was strongly affected by it and has adapted these, what I gather are some combination of traditional Sufi insights and Almaas's own work to somehow come up with these 35 body forms, as he calls them, that are somehow observable and experienceable within the body. And the therapeutic use of it seems to be an opening for people, at least the ones for whom it works.
What would be interesting though is when they're observable within the body. I wonder if that is something that comes easier to some people than others, or if it's something that develops over time. Because I've done nothing quite like that, but other things that involved self-exploration or experience or whatever, and sometimes I oftentimes did not have the experience as was anticipated.
Yeah.
Or instructed.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
We should. I wonder about that because I asked him during the thing if it was anything like Eugene Gendlin's work. He was a psychologist at the University of Chicago and had this therapeutic approach where you tune into what's happening in your body, and he called it the felt sense. It was very popular. It's called focusing work, and I wondered if it was similar, but he said it's not. But it sounds similar in that there's a certain sensitivity to what's happening in the body that's required. And it's a good question whether some people.
Right. Well, some people in general, in my experience, is some people are better able to tune into whatever it is than others. The other thing I'd love to have him back on sometime to question more about is, it seems in confronting death, I think what he recommended about working in hospice and all is wonderful. My own father, one of the ways he dealt with my mother's passing was he became a bereavement counselor through hospice, and in helping other people, I think in large part, and he would say this, it was very helpful for him. And although I think when it comes to confronting death, what we were talking about, I think belief plays into it in a big way, because if somebody believes they're going to the happy hunting ground, it's a lot more appealing to them than somebody who thinks, okay, that's it, or whatever, or I have another life coming up. And he sort of mentioned that because he said, oh, I can continue my work or whatever like that, or my progress. Not if you believe that. If you don't believe that, then it would be difficult to have that same.
I'm sure that's true. At the when you're facing it square on, if you think there's something good coming to the soul, it's no doubt comforting, and it probably helps you face death. That would seem to be the case.
Right.
On the other hand, my mother was a devout atheist who kept insisting that death is just the end, and it's like going to sleep forever.
Right.
And she wasn't afraid when she was dying. So you never know. Some people who have a belief in an afterlife are terrified because they think they're going to hell, or they're going to be punished, or they're going to turn into
has used that for centuries to control people, as other groups and religions and all. And there are those in that faith that don't do that. And I think the emphasis has been since Vatican II has been less in that direction, and more in a more uplifting and positive direction. But
I bet there's a lot of individual variation. The other question I had was, we now have hospice, and a lot of what Neal was saying about what he learned and how he's changed in his view of death and all that came from spending time at hospice. Well, maybe people who die in hospice have a different experience of it than people who die,
very good point. Yeah.
In a hospital where they're suffering, or there's, craziness going on, or at home with, the wrong people around you, or on a, side of a road because you were hit by a car, or, hospice.
Yeah, the guy who said, I almost died and my whole life flashed before me, and then I realized it was the wrong life. And
it was somebody else's life, right?
Somebody else's life. And, not to kid about, but it's, but
I'm sure it varies, but, this notion, this spiritual practice of facing death, he mentioned Montaigne, the philosopher. I'd never heard that, but
Right.
the Buddhists and Hindus, there's a long tradition of meditating in cemeteries and
Right.
cremation grounds.
You mentioned that in one of our recent interviews that came
That's
up.
right. That's right. And I remember when I was doing
Yogananda was brought, right?
I learned when I was researching the Yogananda book that when he was young and he was a seeker, teenager in Calcutta, he was doing everything, he could. He learned all kinds of practices and stuff. And at one point he had a tantric teacher and they would meditate on the cremation grounds, at the burning ghats where, bodies were burned. And he had a skull that he was keeping in his meditation room in his house until his father found it. His father did not like that, and but that it's a tradition of looking at death and the impermanence of life is a valuable spiritual
it gives
practice.
You a perspective on life. But in any event, well, the book, The Shapes of Truth, and get it. We'll probably have him back on at some point. There are some other things I'd like to get into with him. And again, if you're watching, please subscribe on YouTube channel. If you're listening, please subscribe. Doesn't cost anything. We have about 300 shows in our archives and some really great stuff. It's so enjoy it, and we want to keep it online and free for all time to come. So anybody that's out there that wants to help us do that, please contribute. We're not a nonprofit. You can't make a donation, but please make a contribution and go to spiritmatterstalk.com, and information is there.
If you're new to our podcast, go back and take advantage of 250 or so shows that we recorded before we started doing videos. You can have the audio, you can get it on your phone. We have a few years worth of incredible people whom we've spoken to. It's a spiritual path in itself to go through the archive.
It's a great course. Okay, until next time.
Next time, here we go. Bye.
Bye.